Hello, friends. So, this is going to be a review of Beryl, as well as providing you sort of practical insights for the Lingering Glow archetype in 3.2. But mostly, it's going to, through that, teach you how to sort of understand and look at the game from a micro level when it comes to, understanding how to read a DPT spreadsheet, for instance, right? And through something like a DPT spreadsheet, we're able to determine how the value of portraits are presented, as well as the best resonances, the best Psychubes, um, and ultimately come to a conclusion on whether or not we should be investing into a character. Now, I'm going to keep clearing my throat. I'm sorry. I have some kind of a flu again. Um, Now, the reason why I'm doing this review in this manner is that I just don't have time to make a structured, sort of very static type review that I used to do, right? Where it's kind of like edited, as well as there's a script as part of it, and so on, right? I don't have the time to be creating something like that at the moment, at the start of the year, I guess, until sometime during like July is when I'm going to have a lot more free time. But before then, or until then, I need to sort of do the best that I can with the limited amount of time that I have. So, but in doing so, I want to provide something other than just regurgitating and reading off like skill passives and skill information and so on, right? I want to give you guys information that you can actually use, where it's not just one ear out the other. Like when I usually make a review video, it's, um, I guess, it doesn't perform quite as well because, I feel like in order to engage with it properly, you have to be in that mindset. Um, but here, I feel like I can sort of explain it to the point where you can be a little more interested in this sort of like numbers aspect of the game, right? So I'll start off with describing, providing insights to the mechanics of lingering glow, and then the rotation. Ultimately, that's going to be the lingering glow portion done, and then I'm going to talk more about Beryl, about the DPT numbers, how to make your own spreadsheet. I'm going to provide you with these spreadsheets itself so that you can, use it and carbon copy it and so on, if you want, or you can tinker around with it and adjust the values to meet the sort of Psychubes or conditions that you want to set for this team. Um, yeah. So let's get into it, right? So, lingering glow. I've basically written a bunch of talking points, and I'm going to try and do my best. Obviously, I haven't written anything for it, so there's going to be a lot of and ahs, but bear with me, right? Lingering Glow is essentially an archetype that totally revolves around generating Beryl's follow-up attack, which is called Destined Doom, right? The how we augment these follow-up attacks is through the use of crystals. There's blue crystals, or emanations, I think it's called. Blue crystals, purple crystals, and green crystals. But for the sake of this review, we're not going to really dive into anything related to the green crystal. This is more about green crystals are more about, experimenting and fitting Beryl into random teams on your descent into reveries, or even Wailing Well. But for the most part, you're not going to be using this build in any sort of like in-game scenario moving forward, right? And then we have blue crystals, which is essentially her using her follow-up attack, Destined Doom, and being able to make a sort of minor version of it, a mini version of Destined Doom, right? It has its own separate multiplier. And then the purple crystal purely deals with increasing the multiplier of the Destined Doom attack relative to the Lingering Glow amount, right? Whereas the blue build is static, and it depends, the value only changes through portraits. Purple crystals is dynamically changes with the amount of lingering glow at hand, which is why it is the sort of default crystal build moving forward. At least that's how it was in CN, where everybody gravitated towards the larger multiplier. If you add all the multipliers together for blue, it was higher. Purple build, everyone didn't really understand the nuances of it yet before DPT Sheets started to come out. And then everybody understood why it's better in the long term. And because the environment is trending towards that, this is the default crystal build that everybody uses now. Okay, in order to generate follow-up attacks, we need to build a resource called Lingering Glow. This resource is accumulated through applying debuffs Halo and Burn, right? On the right hand of your screen, once Beryl comes out and you're able to play Beryl, there's that crystal shape, right? And then the number dynamically moves, okay? That changes only through applying debuffs Halo and Burn. Only 2 characters allow for the application of these 2 resources in 3.2. Beryl, who applies Halo, and then Isolde, who applies Burn and allows for her teammates to also apply Burn as well, right? You can argue that Lopera is a strong contender here as well, but she's not going to be used in the majority of circumstances, unless it's a specific like Reverie stage where you want to speed run it, or Wailing Well and so on, right? Only 2 characters allow for the proper application of these 2 resources in 3.2. Beryl, Halo, and Isolde, Burn, right? Simple. I'm not going to drown you in like the math of it just yet. So just understand that the basic formula for calculating Lingering Glow, which was derived by a good friend, Feng Yang, or Omega. He's one of the researchers for this game, who primarily posts on either Bilibili or NGA. The formula is Lingering Glow equals Halo plus Burn times 5 divided by the number of enemies on the field, right? Pretty straightforward. So Halo, say that you generated 15 Halo, you would multiply that amount by 5, divide by the number of enemies on the field, and that's how much increase in Lingering Glow you will get for that turn, for instance, right? As far as output is concerned in 3.2 and moving forward, due to the shift in endgame environments largely being boss fights that take 15 plus turns, we can summarize that at P0, blue crystals is only used for less than 5 rounds, so a short-term fight, right? And then purple crystals is used everywhere else due to scaling reasons, okay? Mostly this is to do with her buff called Vision, and also this allows for her to basically free up a lot of the AP so that her teammates can be utilized properly as well, right? At P0, we have a Halo cap of 30 and a Burn cap of 30. This is essentially capping Lingering Glow generation. So what I mean by this is that beyond the cap of 30, say that in one round you hit the Halo cap, but you still have like 3 actions that your character is working on that pertains to Halo, you won't be generating any more Lingering Glow from those attacks if they're increasing Halo in some way, right? Same goes with Burn. The Burn cap is 30. So Halo's cap is increased when Beryl gets to like P2, it increases to 35. When Beryl gets to P5, it increases to 40, right? And then the Burn cap breaks when Marsha comes into play, where depending on the number of Lingering Glow teammates that she has, this will increase to like 35, I believe, right? So those are the only 2 ways to augment the breaking of this cap. So essentially what this means is that the amount that you can generate per turn is hard capped, right? So what happens is at the end of every turn, the Halo debuffs on the enemy. Say, for instance, on this particular enemy, I have 28 stacks of Halo, right? It will then be halved after that turn. So it will be 14 at the start of the next round, right? Same goes with Burn. If it was at 30, it will be reduced to 15, and so on. Same goes with the overall Lingering Glow value, right? If it was at 400, and it will be diminished to 200, and so on. So How this is solved is through Beryl's ultimate and Isolde's reaccumulation mechanic. So what Beryl's ultimate does is that it basically snapshots the amount of halo that's on the field at the moment. Say that there's 30 on the field. You understand that it can't be raised, right? You can't go beyond 30. So how it works is it takes that value, it removes the 30 amount, and then reapplies it. So it essentially acts as though you just applied another 30 halo into the field, which will, rapidly or provide a large influx of lingering glow onto the field, right? So very important. And then Isolde's reaccumulation mechanic. So what this is that, where is her euphoria? Okay, so she does this like at the end of the round. If she's over a certain amount of lingering glow, she does an attack, right? It's called intermezzo, and the value depends on what state of buff that you're in. So for the purposes of simplicity, we'll say that it's at 15%, right? This is usually where it will be, because we will always get to the finale state for result. So that amount of 15%, right, will be reapplied into the field just by having Isolde there. So that's another way to be breaking the cap, right? So the amount of generation that you make every turn is broken through these two methods. So therefore, Beryl's ultimate becomes extremely high priority, and Isolde becomes mandatory at low portrait levels before Marcia. I don't really need to even include this before Marcia part. She is just mandatory in general to the Lingering Glow archetype, right? Until something comes along that's able to generate this insane amount of burn, right? Marcia kind of is able to do that. That's why you'll see silly arguments like, oh, you can 3-man and, you can switch around Isolde for something else. But the reality is that you most of the time, 95% of the time, you will want to be having Euphoria Isolde on your team for Beryl, right? We have two bottlenecks as far as Lingering Glow generation and output is concerned. This will be solved mostly with Marcia, right? Firstly, the slow application of burn in the early rounds. Remember that burn relates to how quickly Isolde gets to warm up, and then it also increases the amount of lingering glow. But because this generation is so slow in the beginning, right, we have other priorities that come before just spamming Isolde's S1, for instance, right? We have to, get the continuous action up from Flutter Page. We have to get Flutter Page's alt rolling. We have to make sure that Fatutu has her Spirit Link or her damage sharing ability spread across everybody in order to be able to moving her shells quickly, and so that she can ultimately generate her ult without having to expend a lot of moxie or play a lot of cards, right? And then number 2, have to wait for Heat, Finale, and Appoggiatura. Appoggiatura. I don't know how to say it. So what Heat is that at P0 Isolde, you have to get to 40 stacks, right? You read here that we have Prelude, Interlude, and Finale. We want to get to Finale, but in order to get to Finale, we have to get to 40 Heat, right? The only way we generate Heat is when, how like the burn is halved, right? That's how that is applied into Heat. So as a result, the warm-up period, at P0, everybody at P0, it's usually between 4 to 5 rounds, right? We have to get into Finale, and then we have to get Appoggiatura rolling, right? What Appoggiatura is let me see here. Okay, here you go. So up to 300 points of Lingering Glow. So we get damage bonus, right? 0.3% times 300 plus 18%, 108% damage bonus is what we want to get by fully charging up Appoggiatura, right? That's when we've sufficiently ramped up our team. So that's what we're aiming for. That's what needs to come online before we're actually outputting a lot of damage. Okay, now moving on to the rotation aspect. I could have taken screenshots, but it's much more simpler to explain it verbally here. Okay, the rotation logic is very simple to understand in 3.2. Beryl's ultimate essentially breaks the lingering glow cap, which leads to higher average lingering glow, meaning your Dust and Doom hits harder on average. Okay, I'm sure you can understand that logic. And then the principle is that in the early game, at the start of the turn, turn one, sorry, you want to be moving Beryl's Moxie twice. Okay, followed by using Fatutu's S2 so that she can Spirit Link, share her shells, so the shells have actual movement, right? And then Flutter Page needs to use her continuous action. And then the next turn, turn 2, Flutter Page will want to use both S1 and S2 in order to get into her ult state, right? That's usually how we do approach the early game. There are different methods in terms of like using Isolde's S1 to push burn more quickly and spread it more quickly that way. That ultimately, over the course of a long fight, right? In the short term, that's beneficial. The long term, it will screw up your rotation. It will prevent Fatutu from moving her Moxie properly through just using her shells, which means that her ult's going to be delayed and your rotation is going to be slightly out of whack. So, understanding that, from here, our rotation priority is as follows. Number 1, Beryl's ultimate should be cast as further back as possible in the AP window. What I mean by that is because we have that, 30 cap, right? We want to be as close to that cap as possible before we use her ultimate, right? That's how she can replicate it and get this big surge in lingering glow, right? So understand that you want to be trying to be delaying Beryl's ultimate for that turn as far back as possible. You want all the other attacks to go through in order for you to generate the close to the cap as possible, right? Simple. And then number 2, ults follow this logic, right? Flutter Page, Fatutu, and Isolde. So Flutter Page goes into her ult. She channels Adieu to Earth or to Mother. She does that, which increases the follow-up bonus and so on. Very important for the follow-up attacks, right? It's based on follow-up attack bonuses. And then Fatutu gives damage bonus as well as crit damage, right? Depending on the number of stacks that's applied. So you obviously want 12 stacks on the target that you're fighting. Isolde is purely damage. So that is the last priority. Her damage profile when it comes to the overall team damage, it's very low, right? It's in the 10 to 15% range, so it's not prioritized at all, right? Number 3. Ideally, we want to cast 2 Beryl skills or move her Moxie twice per turn. S2 should be given priority if vision stacks don't exceed 20. So what vision it does is that it gives incantation might, right? Excess of it gives incantation might up to 20, which means 20% incantation might can be gotten through this. This is why purple scales harder than blue in the long run, because blue will constantly use up their vision stacks as opposed to purple, where we can be accruing this excess amount in order to get a stronger multiplier, right? Stronger overall damage when it comes to the damage formula. So that's why the reason why we're moving Beryl's Moxie twice is that we want to, through this, establish a rotation. Number 6 should actually be high priority in order for it to kind of cohesively roll together. In order to maintain a 2-turn ult cycle, we want to aim to use 1 skill after Beryl's ultimate on the same turn, followed by every other turn, right, that she's not ulting, she wants to be using 2 skills. So how that works is that right here in her insight 3. She gains 1 moxie from entering the fight. That's not what we're referring to. If lingering glow amount is above 60, right, no less than 60, Beryl gains 1 moxie at the end of the round. Okay, so that means at the start of the round, she will be able to fish her ultimate card, right? So how it works is that you come out of ultimate, you want to use 1 skill, right? So how it would be ordered is that on that turn that you're using your ultimate, you want to use the ultimate, move her moxie, or use 1 skill, right? Followed by the next turn where you're going to get an additional moxie. So she's going to have 2 moxie, and then you're going to use 2 skills, and then at the end of that round, she's going to gain 1 moxie, which means she can ult on the next round. I hope you can follow that. Maybe I should have made it visually clear, but hopefully you can understand. We cast Flutter Page's S2, which is the continuous action skill, right? Only when it's available. When she's out of her ult channel, we draw to put her back into ult the following turn using S1 plus S2. So I see a lot of mistakes when it comes to how Flutter Page usage generally, which is that people try to fish for her continuous action, especially people that don't have like P1 Flutter Page, right? That is not how you should be playing Flutter Page. You only use it when it's available. Otherwise, you want to just be maintaining the ult, right? Even in Corvus comps. So I hope that should be explanation enough. It's a very static logic where if you have it available, you use it. If you don't use Verton's Timekeeper skill right over here to use that to generate cards to use just S2, right? Don't need to do that. Number 5, we don't prioritize Isolde's S2 early, but after Finale is online. This is what we exclusively use going forward, right? Isolde's overall output is low. She is only there to provide this S2 debuff, as well as the reaccumulation passive, the Apogatura passive, and as well as allowing her teammates to apply burn, right? So what I mean by this is that because of our slow ramp starting out, right? 1 to 5, 4 to 5 rounds is the ramp up time. When we're talking about this desired freedom debuff, right? It inflicts crit defense, negative crit defense, as well as negative 20 mental defense, right? It's static all throughout. This only changes with portrait level. So we don't need to be applying this debuff. We don't need to be wasting Moxie. We don't need to specifically push Isolde's Moxie because her ult is not how we derive our damage. We derive our damage from Beryl. So we don't really worry about Isolde. This is another trapping that I see a lot of like players make, where they try to dual focus on Beryl plus Isolde. That's not necessary at all. She just needs to start applying this debuff when the lingering glow value becomes relevant, right? Before the warm-up period ends, you want to be starting to use this from like turn 2 or turn 3 onwards, right? You can use Twirling Melody instead to apply burn instances across multiple enemies, right? That might be a better use if there's multiple targets, right? Okay. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Number 6, I already covered that when I was talking about this number 3 here, so you can reference that again if you need to. So now we're going to be moving on to the DPT aspect of it, right? When it comes to reading the skills and stuff, it's pretty straightforward. Beryl actually very simple skills at surface level. But when you have to try and dissect it through you reading her passages and stuff, that's literally going to take 30 minutes. I just don't think that is productive at all. It's usually like one ear out the other type situations, right? So I don't want to be doing that. You can either refer to different content creators or use Prywin to do that yourself, right? If you're interested. So now we're going to move on to the DPT spreadsheet portion. I'm going to be providing this spreadsheet in the description or the pinned comment below, depending on whether or not I have more things to say that I forgot to cover here, right? It's all kind of top of my head type stuff, right? So this is a DPT spreadsheet, right? We need to make this in order to be able to evaluate the last remaining points here, right? This is a theoretical infinite cycle. This was created by Feng Yang, who I referenced when I was talking about the formula for lingering glow, right? He created this because we need to be able to understand the movement of debuffs, understand the movement of shells. We also need to understand how much gust is being generated. We also need to, more specifically, we need to know the average value of lingering glow when we're fully warmed up, right? This is important because everything that we do, our multipliers and everything else, it scales off of this lingering glow value, right? It's very important that we're able to clearly establish it without being subject to, oh, at turn 1 on this specific fight, turn 2 on this specific fight, and moving on. Like, plotting it that way is usually how we make rotations, but for the sake of a clear understanding, we need to be creating something like this, right? On that note, we're tracking P0, P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5. The rotation itself remains static across all portrait levels. The only difference is the values of halo burn and shells themselves, right? We also use this method to create rotations for every other sort of simulation that we do. This is important because you either track something theoretically like this, where it's infinitely repeatable, or you track it, in the minutia, right? So if we take into account and track like a 0 to 4 turn DPT list, right? A lingering glow would be, dead last in that sense, if that was the case, right? But ideally, we do the 8-round method, or the 10-round, or the 15-round, or the 20+ round method. It all follows this logic. You would just independently plot everything so that you can track these important values like this, right? This can be applied to different archetypes. And then we use that value. We use what the information that we derive here in conjunction with the character attributes, right? We have Beryl's attributes, Izol's attributes, Flutter Page's attributes, and Fatutu's attributes, right? How they're augmented plays a key part in the overall damage formula, right? We need to establish core stats like the attack, the crit rate, the crit damage, incantation, ultimate might, penetration, and damage bonus. This is all very important in order to create the overall DPT, right? Understand the overall DPT. The formula in itself is very simple, right? We're just multiplying all these brackets together in order to come to a damage output, right? But we need to do this part properly. We need to do this rotation part properly so that everything here maintains a certain level of fidelity, right? We don't want a DPT list that's all over the place. That really serves no meaning. So when we're diving into this, right, we have Izol's reaccumulation value, which is going to be static at 15%. At P3, Izol's new like pictomancy, I think that's what it's called, portraits, change it for her to have a 20% cap here. That can be easily adjusted. And then we have to figure out the max amount of lingering glow that we're generating, the minimum amount of lingering glow that we're generating, as well as the crit rate that's derived from lingering glow. So what I mean by this is that the actual resource of lingering glow gives you crit, right? It's 5% of the max value. So when you're while you're in that turn, 5% of that amount of lingering glow that's to your right is going to be the extra crit that's being provided. And then the reaccumulation amount is the minimum amount times the multiplied by the reaccumulation percentage, which is going to be 50%. That's pretty straightforward. This is the amount that we're getting back after going down to this, and so on, right? And here we can therefore establish the total amount of lingering glow that we've generated over the course of 4 turns, and then the amount of vision that we're generating through using the skill S2, right? I've provided these ample explanations and formulas, right, to explain the formulas properly for you. So if you're having trouble following, because I'm trying to be as quick as possible, but because I'm doing this off the cuff, I am gonna be struggling here. You can refer to these notes. So going back to through S2, we see that Beryl uses S2 here and S2 down here as well, right? Remember we talked about using those multiple skills. I talked about using Beryl's alt into Beryl's S1, and then using 2 skills afterwards, using Beryl's alt, using Beryl's S1, and then that kind of cycle repeats, right? That doesn't change for any of these other portrait rotations here. The rotation itself doesn't change. So through that, we're able to derive that, you get 6 vision through using those two rank 1 S2 cards. The vision gain through versatility cards is an important one. So blue versatility reduces the amounts of, I believe it's like, reduces the amount that you need in order to cast those mini destined dooms, right? I believe it's to do with minis, yeah. Whereas the purple one has to do with the vision amount, right? So in order to track that, it's actually a static probability that depends on your portrait level. So let me just think. Okay, so what this formula is that 20% of the time you're going to be generating the rank 1 versatility card, right? And that's going to give 2 vision to you, right? It goes 2, 3, and 5 vision, right? And then the probability of actually gaining a rank 1, a rank 2, and a rank 3 is like this, okay? And this dynamically changes as we move up in portrait levels, right? If we go to P5, and we go to so we're no longer getting there's no chance of getting, what's it called? A rank 1 versatility card any longer. It's going to be a 50-50 between whether I get a rank 2 or a rank 3, right? I hope that makes sense. And then we multiply it by 4 because we're doing 4 rounds. Pretty straightforward. Total vision is is adding these 2 values together. Then we also need to understand how many follow-up attacks we do, right? So this is the raw amount. If you're using follow-up attacks without interacting with vision at all, you're only going to be throwing out 6 follow-up attacks. Whereas if you're using vision at P0, you're going to throw out 8.94 follow-up attacks. Once you have P1, this is going to be augmented slightly, and you're going to throw out 7.15 if you're calculating it at 125. But because this is further reduced by vision and becomes 75, it becomes, 11.92, right? Ultimately, the reason why we need to establish this is that we're gaining a set amount of total vision, right? And if this value is greater than the value of the total vision that can be acquired, right? You won't have any vision left during these 4 rounds, right? So that means we're not going to get any of that incantation might, which is why we're playing the purple build to begin with. So it's important to be tracking where this is, where you have this in excess and where you don't have it in excess, right? And then we have to derive so this is basically, a copy of that. The follow-up attack frequency over four turns, just worded differently, right? We need to understand how much gust is being generated by Flutter page, and that's determined by the number of attacks that's going out, right? Plus the fact that we're using her S2 once here, and then followed by the amount of Beryl's follow-up attacks. So how that works is gust is generated every time anybody uses an action, right? So that should make total sense to you. And then we understand that for 2/2, moves her shell 88 times divided by the number of shells you need to move in order for her to throw out her S1, right? Which is going to be at P0, it's going to be divided by 7, right? You need 7 of these shell movements in order to use S1 once. So I hope that kind of is a adequate verbal explanation of this this important part here. It's going to remain consistent. Only the values are going to change as we go in increase in portrait levels here, right? Okay. And then we have the attributes portion. On the right side, it's going to be the static resonances, right? If you didn't know, if you're using a cross resonance character, they're all going to be using these frequencies. If you're using a Z cross character, they're going to be using these frequencies, right? So these values are static, right? The only thing that changes is that, if we change the resonance level, this is all dynamic. So, you can obviously see an increase in these values go up, right? So this is mainly here for reference for the purposes of the spreadsheet. And then we're going to be changing the actual resonances here. In this case, Beryl's best frequency ends up being genuinity, right? So we need the base stats, right? And this is going to be the base stats. If you want to know where to find the base stats, it's available on the CN wiki, right? The reverse 1999 CN wiki. I think it's called like Hugie. You go there to find the base stats pretty clearly. And then we use the the values of the Psychube. So here we're using 1,000-fold fate, right? The stats here 390 attack and 16% crit. We don't worry about any of these defensive attributes at all. We will take into account this stuff later on here, okay? So that's defined here, 60% crit, 390 attack, and so on, which results in the base attack that we get overall, followed by the inclusion of her passives, right? Her passive for her Insight 2 passive is that she gains 10% crit, and then the Psychube, right? What this means is that the Psychube gives a certain amount of crit damage, right? Here we're looking at 48%. I'll explain this when we get to the Psychube portion. I don't want to be going back and forth too much. All right, that's going to confuse people. So you kind of understand the importance of that. And that way we can establish the overall attack the overall crit rate, the overall crit damage, the incantation might, the ultimate might, the penetration, the damage bonus, and so on, right? This is all different for these, for every single character. And this is what you use, right? This is what you need to establish in order to make an archetype-based DPT rotation. It's very important to do. Now, moving on to the the DPT spreadsheet itself, right? What it is up here: Beryl portrait, portrait 0, purple crystal build, which means 2 purple crystals, single target, using the theoretical infinite rotation created by Feng Yang. So this is what we do for pretty much every DPT, right? Where we take the actions like ultimate S1 follow-up attack, right? Here in this case, this would be Destined Doom. This would be when you have the blue versatility card. So this won't be used when we have we only have 2 crystals, which are going to be purple crystals, right? But it will be utilized when we increase our portrait level to P2 and P5 and so on, right? And then Isolde has a whole bunch of follow-up attacks. I'm sorry about that. The reason why she has a whole bunch of follow-up attacks is that we don't really focus on using any other skill here outside of S2, which is going to be used to debuff the enemy. What happens is that she does her intermezzo follow-up attack at the end of every round, which is going to generate the extra moxie for her. Not at the end of the round, it's going to be at the start of the round, right? It's going to generate a moxie for her, and then that's also going to be allowing for the reaccumulation to take place, which in our case, we're setting that value at 50%. So we're using the static values that we derived earlier from the attributes end, right? 650 crit is going to be used and so on, right? You get the idea. I'm not going to go into every single detail, I guess. Okay, so to explain, this is the attack relative to the enemy's defense, right? We're using the base stats here of 850 defense, 20% or 25% damage reduction, 30% crit rate, and it's going to be consistent across the board. That way we can get a good representation of how the how everything lines up when it comes to comparing portraits and so on, right? Resonances, portraits, and so on. So essentially, how the damage formula in it of itself works is that you need the attack value, you need your final attack value, you need your damage bonus value, you need your crit value, right? You need your might value, incantation might, your ultimate might, and so on. You need your multiplier, and you need the amount of times that you're going to be using it across the course of whatever you're tracking, right? And what we didn't include here is afflatus, right? This is not going to be an afflatus positive based DPT, which means that the P0 value will look lower, right? When I created my my DPT video, right? Lingering Glow is much higher. They're rank 2 basically, right? The reason being is that the afflatus is not being calculated here, right? Once we multiply by 1.3, things are going to be a little different. On top of the fact that this is a theoretical, and whereas that you're actually tracking every single round for the most part. Let me just take a drink real quick. My throat is so fucking dry. So I explained the whole the damage portion where it's just multiplying everything together. But what we need to factor in is the fact that, we need to account for the enemy defenses. We need to account for the damage reduction, right? How it works is it's 1 minus the damage bonus, or 1 plus the damage bonus minus the damage reduction. Crit defense is the same thing, where it's 1. Let me just look at the formula itself. we're looking at crit defense here. This value is going to be subtracted by the crit defense and so on. Okay. I think I have everything. Yeah, right. W9 subtracted by X9 and so on. Otherwise, it looks intimidating, but it's literally just multiplying everything together. Okay. That's all it is. Okay, so we're tracking these values in order to end up with the damage column here. We also need to account for the external external parts of damage as well. We have Halo, which does like God. Halo, oh God. Okay, Halo is a negative status. No, that's not there. Right. Okay, Halo is, at the end of the turn, it takes caster's AP attack value times 4% as Genesis damage, right? So that needs to be accounted for, which it is up here, okay? Because we're accounting for the 30 stack multiplied by the 4% multiplier. So, but in order to account for the burn damage, right? Burn damage comes from the actual values of the enemy itself, right? The enemy's attack value. So because that's derived off of that, we're not including it there, but it's not a significant amount at all. It's more like, in the 10K or the 20K amount. Really doesn't make a blip on the overall DPT. Let me think if I've missed anything. So you can kind of track all the actions here. They correspond to what we're using on this infinite cycle. This is how you should be formulating and creating your own DPT sheets, right? You want to be as meticulous as possible. You don't want to leave anything out. So here, the Isolde follow-up attacks, that's all understandable. I got really sidetracked while I was explaining it. The alt follow-up attack uses a different formula where it uses the average value instead of using the min value, right? We use the min value for the other intermezzo follow-up attacks because this attack happens at the start of the round, right? When you're at your lowest in terms of the lingering glow amount, because it's halved, right? Moving on to Flutter Page, it just looks nonsensical because she's always in her alt state, right? She's always performing these extra attacks. Theoretically, right? This is not really going to be the case. You're not always going to be drawing 2 Flutter Page cards every time that she can, so that she can burn it away, right? She does 1 attack while she's channeling, but the rest come from discarding her cards, right? So S2 and S1 are going to be used, and then the rest ends up being the follow-up attacks. The Eureka bonus and the Force Field bonus, they represent what is it? Adieu, which is Adieu Mother Earth, which is considered a reality damage dealt by Flutter Page herself, which is, a form of follow-up attack, right? So that in itself is affected by Gust stacks and Adieu Mother and, everything else. Whereas Eureka is not a follow-up attack, so it's not benefiting from those additional values, which is why it looks empty here. Okay, and then finally we have Flutter Page, who's just going to use her alt when it's up, and then she's always going to be using her follow-up attacks, which is all tracked here, right? Nothing too special really about the Tutu. You understand that these buffs are only relevant to follow-up attacks. That's why, it doesn't count for stuff like, your ultimate and so on, right? That's why we have these empty cells. And for the sake of fidelity, and so it's very easily readable, we have like the intermezzo, where she gets penetration rate, penetration rate, by 30%, right? Depending on the lingering glow amount, right? So everything should kind of make sense to you guys. Thousandfold Fate, we didn't apply the special passives, right, over here. And the reason being is that if we take a look at the Psychube and what the descriptor is, when the carrier performs an extra action, right, and the carrier has a force field, which Beryl does because she's putting in her crystals, which gives her a force field. Gains incantation might increases by 12%. That's very straightforward. So that's the reason why it's only being affected when she's using her follow-up attacks, right? And then the vision amount depends on how much what's called vision portion of incantation depends on the amount of excess vision that she has. Right? Okay, so we're looking at things like the multiplier. You will sort of understand how this works if you read her passive. Basically, Destined Doom is repeated. The 500% is repeated on the target itself, right? On the main target, sorry, the one with the highest amount of halo. Let me just okay, and then we get incantation might up to 1%. For 1% up to 20 times. That much should be clear. And then as a bonus for using the purple crystal, emanation of purple, we gain more halo when we're using our follow-up attacks. And then we also, sorry about that, generating, or our multipliers are increasing based on the amount, or based on who we're attacking, right? I want to mute that real quick, but so how it's represented here is that 1,000% plus the average lingering glow value. Please stop. Average lingering glow value of 352, which is going to be reflected up here, multiplied by the additional multiplier that we have, depending on how much lingering glow we have, right? Multiplied by 2 because we're using 2 purple crystals, so every single purple crystal affects this, right? So if we get to P5, for instance, we'll have 3 purple crystals, so we'll multiply it by 3 and so on. Okay. And then the frequency amount is the amount that we have derived from the frequency follow-up attack frequency here. Okay. So that should be pretty much straightforward. You can dynamically change the values of this, right, to something that we usually use, right, as a static value. 1,000 defense, 20% damage reduction, 25% crit damage reduction, or crit reduction, sorry. Right, but for the purposes of the next part, we're gonna keep it consistent. Okay. And then we add all these values together, or in order to get the overall DPT over the course of 4 turns, right? So the reason why we make something like this is to create, or to be able to gain an insight, right? For instance, tracking the portrait level increases, tracking the DPT increases relative to the frequency that we choose, the resonance increases, and so on. So the important part here is that, okay, you can all see the increases in percentages, I guess, from increasing your portrait level. But the reason why I wanted to present this is to be able to show the insights that we gain from these specific portrait levels, right? Portrait 0 to 1 is a substantial increase due to lowering the total trigger cost to fire Destined Doom from 150 to 125. Frequency further adjusted by vision, okay? This should be pretty straightforward as to why it's such a large increase, right? If we're lowering the threshold down to 125 and then it's further being adjusted by vision, vision subtracts that by 50, then it becomes our frequency of Beryl's follow-up attacks becomes a lot higher, right? And then P2, you will see a lot of people sing the praises of P2 without actually understanding what is going on, and that's kind of the reason why we can use something like this to our benefit, right? What I wrote here is that the crystal count is increased from 2 to 3. The halo cap is increased from 30 to 35. However, due to the vision accumulation through S2 and versatility remains unchanged, with the added possibility of drawing a blue versatility card. We no longer operate on an excess vision stack model, right? So we don't apply this 20% incantation might anymore. So how that's reflected in the actual DPT sheet is that this is P1, this is P1 here, and then this is P2, right? At P1, we include vision. P2, we don't include vision. P3, we also don't include vision. Vision comes back when it's P4 and beyond, right? The reason is pretty evident here, where our total vision is 15.9, right? And then the amount of vision that we're using is 14.48. So realistically speaking, even though this is a theoretical cycle, right? We're only going to be generating an excess of 1% incantation might over the course of 20 rounds, right? So there's no real reason to be associating this as part of the damage model. This is pretty much true on live as well, right? And the fact that we have an extra versatility card is why the amount of vision becomes lower, okay? So how it works is that normally it was, all the cards would be the purple versatility card. But now because, there's a blue card involved, it's multiplied by 2 out of 3, right? Which in turn is going to reduce the amount of vision gained through versatility cards. Here it's 9.9, whereas in P1 it's 13.6, right? Makes sense. Okay, so therefore the gains are not as significant in an infinite cycle rotation, right? In this model, we can clearly see that it's not it's not that big, right? If you were to start taking into account the incantation might and labeling it as having excess incantation might, then this value would jump right into the 20s, right? Then moving on to Portrait 3, Destined Doom modifier due to purple scaling increased from 0.4 to 0.5, resulting in 1% per lingering glow, up from 0.8, right? That might not make any sense to you, but see here how we derived the, let me see, Portrait 2 multiplier. right? How we were using 0.8, and then because we're still using 2 purple crystals, that's how it works. Our multiplier has therefore increased in portrait 3 to 1%, right? But it's, it's not too crazy of a multiplier increase, right? The blue crystal multiplier increases as well from getting the portrait 3. I think that should be reflected clearly. 550% compared to 440%. But we're still subject to the probability of drawing blue versatility cards. So 1 in 3 cards, so 33.3% of versatility cards are still going to be blue cards, which we don't really have too much use for, really. The limitation of no excess vision remains unchanged from P2, right? The same amount of vision generation, hampered by the fact that we're not we're having to draw this blue versatility card. Okay, moving on to portrait 4. Excuse me. Moving on to portrait 4. In live testing for purple crystals, this value is not as substantial as listed here. Okay, we list here as it being 14%. It's not quite as impactful. So what this portrait does is that it increases the multipliers of her S1, right? It's whatever. Increases the amount of halo stacks that's generated by the S1 from like 3, 6, and 9, I'm guessing, to 6, 9, 15. Again, this is not necessary because we're generating a decent amount of halo anyway through the follow-up attacks by using the purple build itself. So this isn't as relevant as it would be if we were using like a blue crystal build, right? 3 blue, 1 purple. And then nothing unexpected at incantation rank 1, 2, and 3. The number of vision stacks gained is increased to 4, 6, and 10, where it was previously 2, 3, and 5, I'm guessing, right? So that is going to lead essentially to the bottleneck that we had here of generating excess versatility cards. We're going to start to generate excess versatility cards over here at P4, right? The total vision, because now we're generating 8 instead of 6, that amount leads to an excess in the total amount of vision that we have, right? It goes up to 17.9 instead of the 15 point something here. And then the same amount of vision is going to be used. So here we start to calculate this as being, sufficient enough to be counted for as the excess vision or the 20% incantation might, for instance, right? Okay, the value is more in line with blue crystal builds as this portrait solves high vision consumption issues for that particular build, right? That's going to be so the blue build is going to be a more, you have to play a lot of these Beryl cards. You have to keep fishing for these vision cards in order to maintain a strong output. And then followed it by increased multipliers to S1 plus S1 generation, which is insignificant once warmed up, right? I kind of explained that. And the big increase here is from P4 to P5, right? Versus the previous, it's a 31.3% increase. This should be consistent across the board, whether it's me doing the calculations, whether it's Feng Yang doing the calculations, or it's IceHood doing the calculations. There should be a huge spike when it comes to comparing this this final portrait. It's a significant increase, okay? Significant increase in power. Crystals increased to 4, which creates the 3 purple, 1 blue stumbling on my words, dude. This additional purple crystal significantly increases follow-up attack multiplier and overall lingering glow generation. Halo cap increase strengthens ramp time as well. So this should be clear across the board. The multiplier is significantly increased at P5. Here at P4, it's 1,796. Here at P5, it's 2,334. Okay. Huge increase here. We're also multiplying it by 3 now that we're using 3 purple crystals instead of 2, right? That's how we're getting this multiplier amount. What else did I talk about here? Halo cap being increased to 40 now. So overall, this should be reflected in P5, where the average value of lingering glow is, 45, more lingering glow, an increase in its average value, right? So huge increase here, which leads to the portrait being reflected in this way, right? It's not because we decided to make up a number, okay? When it comes to the frequency compared to placidity, which is when you don't have any sort of resonance frequency at all, we gain an 8.1% overall damage over not having placidity. This isn't Beryl's damage. This is overall team damage, right? Significant. And then when talking about the resonance levels, right? I told you some while ago when I was talking about the King Fool parade. In that video, I was referencing the good scaling that Beryl has with her resonances. This should be reflected here, where the overall DPT of the team's damage is increased by 12.2% when she's resonance 13, 22.1% when she's resonance 15. So vital to get these resonances going in patch 3.2 if you want to play her properly, right? Play her as being very strong. So Beryl has very high scaling with resonance levels, improvements close to 0 to portrait 0 to portrait 1 increase, and higher than single portrait increases until P5, right? You can see a reflection of that here, right? This is overall damage increase, not just the single character increase. So from this information, we can gather that, if you're debating on whether or not you should invest more into trying to get a copy of Beryl versus increasing her frequency, right? When it comes to a monetary value, right? When you're trying to decide whether to buy unilogs or whether to buy material packages, right? You can easily show the most cost-efficient way to increase overall damage over here, right? So it's very important to instead go for something like Resonance 15 through using the brain frequency item that you get for completing that event, right? I think it's a brain wave, as opposed to just trying to dump more unilogs to try and get the next portrait increase, right? This should be making sense to you guys. The total damage breakdown at P0 is as follows, right? We have Beryl's value, right? Her contribution is 75.5%, which is basically, the bulk of the damage is coming from Beryl. Isolde's value, Isolde's damage amount is, close to 17%. Flutter Page is 3.39. Fatutu is slightly higher than you would normally see because she's theoretically being considered as attacking so frequently every time, right? These shells are ping-ponging left and right. So this value becomes increasingly skewed towards Beryl through increasing portrait levels, regardless of overall group portraits. So if we were to statically increase everybody's portrait by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? This damage breakdown would skew more into Beryl's favor as we go forward, right? If it was just Beryl's portrait increasing, this would obviously skew, a lot higher. But even still, like, the point I'm trying to make is that Beryl is the big damage here. Isolde's damage, while relevant through her follow-up attacks, her ultimate is not a priority. So what that means is that when you're playing Lingering Glow, you're going to run into this issue of, like, at the start of the round, I want to use my debuff card, right? We come from this mentality of making sure that our debuff is up before we use our attack. No, we just want to be as AP efficient as possible. That's all we need to worry about, right? So when you don't fall into that trap of, like, oh, I got a pre-debuff before I use my ultimate for Beryl, not for Beryl, sorry, for Isolde, because it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. Her damage contribution from her one ult might be, a decent amount of burst damage, but it doesn't really affect things too much in the grand scheme of things, right? So we want to be as AP efficient as possible, right? We don't want to be pre-debuffing into ult, therefore generating one less Moxie. We want to always follow the most AP efficient way possible. This rule would be bent if her contribution would be higher, right? If her contribution was higher, that rule would change, and so on. So in talking about Psychubes now, Psychubes, I mean, it should be a no-brainer. Her signature Psycube is her best in slot. Beryl's best in slot, that is. Our values that we used that we attained on the spreadsheet were done with a 5, right? The increase in overall team damage from going from level 1 to level 5 is roughly 12%. Okay, overall team damage. So, go back to the whole the portrait portion, increasing or dumping your gluttonies. Yeah, they're called gluttonies. Gluttonies into increasing her Psycube level is extremely high priority, when it comes to increasing her overall damage. What happens is that here she gains critical damage 8% up to 6 times, so 48% crit damage, right, for herself, which is significant. And then when she's performing extra attacks, obviously incantation might and so on. Now, when it comes to Flutter Page, right? When it comes to Flutter Page for this sheet, well, this DPT sheet, we're using Kiparina's Psycube, right? This is more reflective of what we actually use in CN in 3.3, right? The reason being is that while giving her incantation might, right, in 3.2, Matilda's Psycube, after you do her anecdote and stuff, she gives you a Psycube. This is the Psycube. While it gives 18% incantation might, which is significant, right? Significant. The defensive stats of this Psycube is extremely poor, right? It gives damage bonus and it gives 2,000 HP compared to Aurora After Winter, which gives 3,000 HP and 16% HP as well. For someone like Flutter Page, who's always going to be, extremely squishy, right? Even with someone like Masha, that's going to be sustaining her. This becomes relevant for the majority of these endgame fights when it comes to Mains Bulletin and Tide of Thoughts. Okay, you can actually change this value here yourself and include the incantation might adjust the attack value, and you'll be able to derive a much higher overall DPT, right? Everybody looks at numbers, and if it's high, it's good. You can finagle it to favor those sort of like max DPS scenarios as well, but realistically, we just don't use it anymore. The only time we do use it, aside from those conditions that I just explained, is when impromptu incantation. Starflatus impromptu incantation, we'll just continue to use it as core, right? Okay. Investment, right? Now this investment part, I'm really just, I don't even have any talking points for it. P0 Beryl, right? Should you pull? P0 Beryl is a must pull, right? The reason why it's a must pull is that Marsha is a must pull in 3.3, right? She is the best sustainer in the game. She has absurd longevity, right? There is no sort of like, oh, she hits this this sort of like 90-day window and she's kind of out of the running, right? She's always going to be used. So Masha is a must pick. And for the duration of these 2 patches, probably even going into 3.5, right? Lingering Glow is going to remain basically, top 3, right? At the moment, it's top 2. Its position is number 2, but that is, they're still going to maintain that amount, right? So what I wanted to say was Beryl P0 is a must pull if your unilogs allow for it, right? If you have excess unilogs, right? If you're pulling for Beryl, you're pulling for Anjanala, you're pulling for if you're pulling for Broom and Anjanala, Beryl is a must pick if you have enough excess pulls to get her, and then in the following patch get Masha, right? A lot of you are going to be concerned with whether or not you can pull on Isolde, right? Isolde is going to continue to be in the Euphoria patch, or Euphoria, the Ripples banner in 3.3, so you can get her there, or she still is the Euphoria character in 3.2, as well as the Golden Cassette character in 3.2, right? Good opportunity to get her there. And then on top of that, in 3.4, they have a 100 free pull banner that you have, right? You can only choose one character and you're locked into that choice, but the other alternative choices aren't that great, all things considered. It has like, Tooth Fairy, Isolde, Corvus being the top 3. Depending on what you need, this is where you can get your additional copies of Isolde, or you can get your copy of Isolde then, if you do decide to pre-pull on Beryl and try to use her in the meantime without Isolde, right? That's still fine. The point I'm trying to make is that P0 has insanely good value. Longevity-wise, it's going to span the life cycle of at least 3 patches, likely 4 to 5 patches, depending on when we're getting this this collaboration, right? So try to pull for P0 Beryl, and then in regards to the portraits, hopefully this portion helps your decision, and you can see it clearly and how I've defined how that works, how we arrive at these values. So it's not just like I just put it here for the sake of promoting Beryl's portraits, right? What I wanted to say is that when it comes to a P5 investment level, right, where you have the sort of whale tier investment where everything is P5, the Lingering Glow archetype is among only one of 3 archetypes that are able to reach the 10 million DPT amount, right? So in that sense, they they're going to remain extremely valuable for a very, very long period of time. Um, so myself, I'm going to be pulling for P5 Beryl here, and then try to get Isolde as well, right? In talking about Isolde, this is basically the machine translation from the screenshots that I took, right? I can't find a clearly translated um, image anywhere. I just haven't had time, so I just put these here instead. But they basically serve the same purpose of showing us that P1, the Appoggiatura, right, the 108% damage bonus becomes 145% damage bonus instead. And that's about it. And then P2, so you can go into the spreadsheet and you can basically adjust that value to reflect what you need here. Okay, 108%. You can just change that to 145, so you can accurately track and account for P1. Isolde, if you want to find out the exact numbers. Sorry, OBS is bugging out for me. P2, the ramp is increased, significantly increased, to 20 instead of 40, right? When we're talking about getting into her finale state, getting into Isolde's finale state, you need 40 heat stacks, so that becomes 20. So that's a significant reduction. And then the mental defense is now 25. Mental defense reduction is now 25 instead of 20, right? I explained how this, how the attack value is derived, right? We need to be factoring in the desired freedom, right? In order to get it, this value is basically going to be 25 if you choose to include that into your calculations. I don't know why, but OBS just keeps on bugging out for me. Okay. What happens on my end is that like I see like these images, but they keep like sliding around. P3 is the important one, right? Reaccumulation significantly increases from 15 to 20%, right? On paper, this does not look good, right? But in reality, what it does is, this reaccumulation amount, right? We have it at 15% across the board. Our P5 DPT is basically 3.6 mil, right? And then if we were to change this to 20%, it would be closer to 4 mil now, right? So significant increase there just from the portrait, from getting that, unlocking that portrait. So overall team damage, I would equate that to about 6 or 7%. Unless you have like P5 where this value became, what was it, like 44%? Right. So it's very significant portrait to actually get. The only way I would recommend you to get it though is from that free banner that I just mentioned, right? So if you get your single copy of Isolde in 3.2, you have that ability to get the additional copies of Isolde in 3.4 through that that free banner that I'm talking about. Okay, so oh my god, super long video. I hope this was informative, right? Obviously this was not based on any script, so I was trying to pause and think and try to speak coherently at the same time, but I hope this had a little more meaning compared to, your average sort of reviews where you're just regurgitating skills and kind of theorizing, right? The majority of Our reviewers. Anyway, anyway, the important thing is that now you have access to a sheet like this. I'm going to link it in the either the comment section or the description section, right? Depending on whether or not I need to. I forgot stuff here. And you can use it to create your own. You can model your own sheets like this, right? It's initially looks intimidating, but hopefully I've done enough to explain how this sort of all works out for you, right? The attributes, the rotation aspect, building your own rotation, tracking your own skills, tracking the correct resources that you need. That much should be straightforward. So I hope this was beneficial. This is gonna be the last time I mention, I guess, Beryl for a little while, because this is my review in a sense. Yeah, moving forward, I don't have as much free time as I want to. I'm obviously going to continue to play this game as my main game. I have way too many accounts. But hopefully I've imparted a good bit of wisdom that you can use. Anyway, that's it from me. Till next time.